Okay, folks, welcome back. Thanks for joining us again. So we're going to have a number of presentations again this week. First, Kaitlin Macaranas, who's an environmental science graduate student, will be giving a talk on invasive green crabs. And then we're going to have a whole crew from the Spatial Institute, led by Dr. Aquila Flower, who's the director of the Spatial Institute, and GIS specialist Natalie Furness. So as always, thanks to the College of the Environment and the Alumni Association for supporting the talks. And a brief editorial note from last week, there are no double-digit tuition increases for next year. So, and all rest assured, I know that was asserted last week, so we can rest easy. Okay, Kaitlin, take it away.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming today. I'm excited to share my thesis research with everyone. So my thesis advisor is Brian Bingham. He is the director of Shannon Point Marine Center, and that's down in Anacortes. And I am a third-year master's student, and I am a National Science Foundation graduate research fellow. Okay, and I'll be talking about the European green crab invasion happening currently in Padilla Bay. Okay, so eelgrass estuaries, they are one of the most biodiverse and super important habitats just because of their ecological significance with the habitats that they support, and that is with the native species that it's just incredibly a hot spot for activity and productivity. And they are under threat due to the green crab. So we can see that after the arrival, this is in Casco Bay, Maine, after the arrival of the European green crab in 2001, the crab came and completely wiped out the eelgrass estuary there and completely changed the habitat, and they are known as ecosystem engineers. And this is, incredibly bad for the environment because, all these species rely, including us, on the sustainability and continued protection of the eelgrass. Okay, and that just happened within the span of 12 years. All right, so the European green crab is in the name. It's native to Europe, but mainly in the Baltic Sea area, northern Africa. And they moved and they got transported to the US on the East Coast in the early 1800s and on the West Coast of the US around 1989, late 80s in San Francisco Bay. And we're going to be focusing on Washington State. Here's a map. So climate change and anthropogenic activities are driving the spread of European green crab from San Francisco all the way up north via El Nino waters. And it's the warming waters that are just ideal for their survival and spread. And the way that they got transported on the East Coast and also through to the West Coast was probably via ballast waters, and that's through that ship up top, and that's when at port they take up water for buoyancy and then release it wherever they board or port at, and that was from Europe to the US. And their larvae and then the El Nino waters brought them from 1989 to Washington, 1998, and just recently in 2022 all the way to Alaska. And we're going to be focusing on a specific estuary. It's Padilla Bay in Mount Vernon area, where they invaded around 2016, and that's just due to the how inland the estuary is. Okay, so why do we care about eelgrass estuaries? They are, like I said earlier, super productive. All of these native species rely heavily on them. My concern is more so how they impact these guys. And these are macroinvertebrates, so worms, crustaceans, bivalves, all the ones living in the sediment. And not a lot is known about how they impact, especially on the West Coast. Most of the research, because they invaded the East Coast earlier than here, is a lot of the research is based on the East Coast. And so we want to know what they are doing to the sediment and over time what to expect. And we can use what we know about the East Coast to sort of infer what to expect. So my research question is, how will they impact eelgrass survival, specifically in Padilla Bay, because 2016, they're still early in the invasion. They haven't yet established. So it's a perfect opportunity to track and sort of monitor what their overall impact is. And also looking at the fauna community, which is very important for the stabilization and nutrient composition of the sediment that the eelgrass relies on. And so investigating the ecological impacts and also what they do to the food web out in Padilla Bay, and looking more so into biodiversity, into what to expect food web wise, how that will affect the health and the quality of the food web and the integrity of Padilla Bay, just because sustainability of Padilla Bay is incredibly important. Okay, so coming back to my project, what I did was I ran a quarantine experiment at Padilla Bay, because the European green crab is not yet established, so I can't just go and release crabs out there, and so Padilla Bay has one of the largest eelgrass beds of the Northern America. So very important habitat that they support, specifically like right in our backyard. And so to do this, went out to Padilla Bay and had this tank cookie cutter like sort of contraption. And what we did was we cut it out and with the sediment and to the dimensions of our tank, because we were going to run a quarantine tank our quarantine experiment at Shannon Point. And the team that we assembled, we took this, you can kind of see on the screen, the sled. We had to go during low tide and carry these very heavy sediment samples back to Shannon Point in Anacortes. And we collected about 15 of them, and we had to carry it up this spiral staircase. It was very heavy, very tiring, and I'm so glad the team was there. And set it up. We transported them directly to Shannon Point and set them up in these tanks that match the dimensions, trying to minimize and keep the macroinvertebrate communities as undisturbed as possible. So this is the European green crab. We had to get permits to keep them and to handle them because they are, one of the worst invasive species, marine-wise, and they are very aggressive. Kind of see, they don't look very aggressive, but they are. They're tiny, tiny little ones, and we all had males because males we had to make sure that none of them got released or had eggs and released it out. So controlling as much as possible. Okay, and then so we broke up the experiment to two parts, and the first one was looking at the impact of on macroinvertebrates by the green crab. So set up, and we had to put these weights on because I had nightmares of them escaping from our tanks and just did not want to be known as someone who released green crab. Okay, and then so we went ahead and got the sediment, collected them out, ran the experiment for about 14 days, and half of the tanks had crabs, half didn't, and cored out after the end of the experiment, cored out a chunk of the sediment and stained them for the invertebrates, analyzed them under a microscope for the community composition, and picked out all the worms and other macroinvertebrates. Okay, and then the part 2 was the eelgrass and looking at what their impact was on eelgrass survival. And this ran for about 7 days, and just you can see there's these 5 tanks and cut in half, and they're paired. So one side had a crab and one side didn't, and just collecting the eelgrass that was floating at the top that had been removed. Dried them, ashed them, and then got their masses to compare. And you can see for the results at the end, after identifying the invertebrates to the lowest taxonomic group, or to the lowest taxonomic level, we went ahead and saw that there was an impact on abundance and biodiversity. With, you can see the yellow is a control. The yellow had higher abundance of fauna, or the macroinvertebrates, compared to the green crab. Shannon's H, so the biodiversity was was higher, significantly higher in the controls than there was in the treatment tanks with the crab. Species richness was also higher in the controls. And then our evenness with species were pretty similar between the two. And then went ahead and did multidimensional scaling, and what we found was that the treatment tanks were significantly different between the two, control and the tanks with crabs. And see also with the eelgrass biomass, it was significantly reduced between treatments. There was above ground and below ground there was a higher amount collected that was floating at the top, which means more disturbance and reduced survival of the green crab of the green eelgrass, expected. And then with the pairs, you can see the more eelgrass was recovered from the tanks with the crab as well. Okay, and then implications really quick. Eelgrass, eelgrass, the ecosystems will be affected with the green crab's arrival, and that would impact the fauna, it would impact the native species, and it would impact us as well. And it is bleak in the face of climate change, but green crab management and research is happening right now at Padilla Bay. Restoration is well underway, trying as much as we can to fight the spread of the green crab. But then, okay, that's for later. Yep. What am I?
Feel free to just hang out.
Sorry.
Oh.
It's like the best questions.
Okay.
You gonna switch me over? Okay.
Yeah. Hi, everybody.
I'm back. I was here earlier in the quarter to talk about the Salish Sea Atlas. My name is Aquila Flower. I'm a professor in the Environmental Studies Department and also director of the Spatial Institute. I'm not going to talk a lot this time. I'm here with a big crew of the research assistants who work with the Spatial Institute, as well as Natalie Furness, who is the GIS specialist and GIS wizard for the Spatial Institute. So we're going to take turns talking about different projects that we're working on, our 4 main projects right now. And I think I'll just have everybody introduce themselves as they start talking about their project. So to begin with, I'm going to hand it over to Nat to give you a little context about what the Spatial Institute is.
I'm gonna hold this.
Yes.
Okay. Hi. Let me know if you can't hear me, but hopefully you can. I don't know why I'm pulling that out. Yeah, we're the Spatial Institute, which is really cool, in my opinion. Main question, what is the Spatial Institute? Officially, like, our definition is an interdisciplinary center for environmental and spatial research, which is a little bit broad. We'll get into it. We were founded in 1999. So how many years is that? It's our 26th year. Yeah, we just celebrated our 25th anniversary. So that's really fun. We are in the College of the Environment in the Environmental Studies Department. Yeah, that's about it. As an institute, digging into what spatial and environmental research actually means for us, there's a couple different components of basically what we are charged with doing as the Spatial Institute. So foremost, we want to disseminate spatial information across campus and then also the wider community. We work with people on campus as well as people off campus, whether that's just a public or private organization, government agencies. We provide education and training to students, staff, and faculty. I run a lot of story map workshops, stuff like that. Yeah, and we do a lot of research collaboration with students, faculty, other organizations, like I mentioned. And the main goal is to find strength in interdisciplinary approaches to environmental issues, to basically to put our heads together and figure out how to solve whatever it is we're looking at. And also, one of our favorite things we do is basically creating learning opportunities for students, being able to employ them and have them work on real GIS projects that feel important, have an impact, take it a little bit beyond the classroom setting. In terms of who we currently employ, so we have Dr. Flower, our institute director, you have me, Natalie. We have one post-bac researcher who is not here today. We have currently 5 graduate researchers, 7 undergraduate researchers, 3 graduate GIS teaching assistants, and 13 undergraduate GIS teaching fellows. So they help out in the lab. We have people researching. We've amassed quite a crew. Putting these slides together, I realized, I was like, there's a lot of people involved in this, which is really exciting. So yeah, I think that's about it. Cool. I'll pass it off. I'll take over here. Before each project, I'm just going to do a little context background to introduce it. So the first project we're going to talk about is active channel mapping, by which I mean mapping where stream banks are. And this is a really important thing to do because of the importance of riparian areas. You've probably heard about how riparian vegetation is a really important part of healthy ecosystem functioning, and it can be used as this tool for climate change adaptation by making sure we have vegetation that's shading streams to reduce the negative effects of increased stream temperature. Now, the issue is that we don't exactly know where all the stream banks are. A riparian zone is that area right next to the stream. And that means you have to know where the stream bank is, where we get our maximum sort of water height. And that can be a little tricky to figure out, in part because if you just fly over in an airplane, you'll see a lot of the stream banks are covered by vegetation, so you can't actually see where they are. So we are relying on data from a LiDAR data set that's light detection and ranging, where airplanes fly over and fire a lot of really fast laser beams at the ground and use super precise timers to record when they bounce back. And that time lets them figure out how far the laser beam traveled before bouncing back, and it lets them create a very detailed model of the elevation, the height of trees, and so on. So we're using this to let us see underneath the vegetation. And that reveals all sorts of interesting, fascinating things, like stream channels that you couldn't even see, stream channels that are no longer full of water, past stream channels as well. This figure on the right here is showing first just the aerial photograph of part of the Nooksack River, and then on the right is the LiDAR elevation model that we might use to figure out where stream channels are. I put in the white arrow to just point out a patch where it doesn't really look like there are any stream channels when I look at the photo, but I can see this more complicated network of channels when I look at the LiDAR data. So I'm going to hand it over to Finley, Ben, and Ryan to talk about the details of this project that they're working on doing active channel mapping with LiDAR data.
Yeah, so my name is Ben. Our project is funded through the Puget Sound Partnership, which is funded by the state of Washington and the federal government. Our goal with this project is to produce an accurate data set of stream channel banks within the Puget Sound watershed using LiDAR imagery. Like Akila mentioned, accurate stream channel data is important because it's used in all kinds of stuff like land use planning, ecosystem monitoring, and habitat restoration. Unfortunately, the existing national hydrography dataset is out of date, which means it doesn't always show where the active stream channels are because stream channels migrate over time. It also shows most channels as a single line, so you can't really tell where the banks of the channel are, and that's a pretty big limitation of the existing data. Our dataset will be publicly available through the Puget Sound Partnership's website, and we're going to give an overview of what that data looks like and how we've been creating it over the next couple of slides.
All right, I'm Ryan. I'm going to talk about the methods a little bit. The main thing we use is a set of Python scripts that we have in there. So we draw a selected area within the stream, kind of like what we're seeing in here. This is like our selected area, and we run our Python scripts based off of that then create a set of contours that allow us to select where the actual stream channel is. So in order to select the stream channel, we're looking for what the true bank of it is. And so we use an elevation model based off of the LiDAR to find where that main channel is. And we use a combination of the LiDAR and then also some imagery as well. And we kind of get a product like this. So the white line's dividing the different sections. Some of those are stream channel, and then some of those are islands. And so we go through and decide which are the islands, which are the stream channels. Yeah.
All right, I'm Finley, and so our results for this project can.
Sharing's over. Hang
All
on,
right.
wait,
Oh.
we got to share for the Zoom folks, so hang on. Keep talking though.
All right, so basically you can get the results for this project on the Puget Sound Partnership website. So we've gone through, it's basically we go through each RIA, the water resource inventory areas, and as of now, the only ones that are completely finished are RIA 1, which is up in Whatcom County where we are, it's the Nooksack watershed, and RIA 8, which is King County, kind of extending east up the I-90 corridor with the Cedar and the Sammamish rivers. And as we continually work on it over the next 2 or so years, people will be able to get these other RIAs and kind of view the work that we've done.
Lost our screen. Okay. Just in closing, I want to say this is a really exciting project to me because we're creating the authoritative data set that's going to be used for all those sorts of policy, funding, restoration, conservation decisions that are linked to riparian zones. So this feels like really powerful work to have undergraduate research assistants involved in, and of course, they're doing an awesome job. Okay, our next project, climate and land cover change. Oh yeah, okay. Individual claps. All the claps. Climate and land cover change in the Salish Sea region. This figure here shows an average of annual temperature at a bunch of stations across the Salish Sea region, going back to 1900 on the left and over to 2020 on the right. And looking at that, we can see, of course, no surprise, this warming trend that we know is going on. But we want to be able to explore that for our specific region, local stations, local watersheds, in a way that hasn't been possible, because until now, all the data sets are either for Canada or for the US, or maybe a big international data set, but we haven't had locally relevant data. So this project is setting out to answer how have climate and land cover changed in the Salish Sea region since European settlement, and how is climate projected to change in the future, with its goal to create a set of documents and data sets and maps and so on that can be used by local practitioners, community members, and so on to understand how our environment is changing in the region we live in. So I'm going to hand it over to Emily and Taylor to begin with.
All right, I'm Emily. I'm one of the graduate research assistants working with the Spatial Institute. And I've been working on this project since January. This is a project that's funded by the EPA, for now at least. The goal is to quantify the regional effects of climate change, to prepare for what is an uncertain future. We don't know how much emissions there's going to be, so we need to be prepared for a variety of possible scenarios. And the result that we're hoping to achieve is to document changes in climate, hydrology, glaciers, and land cover, all in the Salish Sea bioregion. So again, focusing really on this region, this sort of transboundary region, where there's not a whole lot of unified data at the moment. And a lot of what we're doing is creating that unified data so that people will have access to it. And we're also, of course, looking at projections of future change under various scenarios, again, in climate, hydrology, glaciers, and land cover.
Hey, I'm Taylor.
So the basic workflow, it's pretty much the same, whatever field or discipline we're looking at, whether we're looking at precipitation, temperature, glaciers, whatever it might be, snow. We first start with collecting all records that are available to us, and I mean it. Emily and I are like scrounging the internet for whatever is out there. We're scraping the internet for any records, any archival data. This is not hyperbolic. This is what my desktop will look like. That's kind of the start of it. After we do that, we summarize it, organize it in a way that's interpretable, in a way that we can analyze that data. When doing that, we are using softwares that y'all are probably familiar with, ArcGIS Pro, Excel, RStudio, and we use those to analyze the historic trend. And once we get an idea for the historic trend, then we could make projections and model what future geomorphological changes we might see in the future for the Salish Sea.
All right, so talking first about climate, some of our initial results here. Obviously, temperature is increasing in every season. We all feel that every single year at this point. It feels like every single year there's another heat wave, another set of record-breaking high temperatures. So temperature has not been increasing evenly across the year, however. We've seen higher temperature increases in some seasons than others. This chart right here in red, it shows increases in maximum temperatures, so daytime temperature basically. In blue, and I'm talking about the column on the left here. So in this column on the left, the red it represents maximum temperature, the blue represents minimum temperature, so you can think about that as like nighttime temperature. Historically, so far we've seen greater increases in our nighttime temperatures and our minimum temperatures than we've seen in maximum temperatures. But as we project it out into the future, that might not always be the case. And we might start to see our maximum temperatures actually increasing more rapidly, or our daytime temperatures increasing more rapidly than our nighttime temperatures. For precipitation, again, we're seeing very, very different trends across seasons. Since the early 1900s, we've seen an increase in precipitation in basically every season. That's not necessarily going to be the case, again, moving into the future, where we might start to see our springs and our summers in particular get drier, even as our winters and our falls continue to get wetter. Moving on to glaciers, obviously we're losing our glaciers. That's a pretty well-known fact at this point. What is kind of astounding is the rate at which it's happening, especially over the past 10 years or so. This is a graph of total glaciated area in the Canadian portion of the Salish Sea region. So sort of the southern coast mountains, and Vancouver Island has a few glaciers as well. And this is since sort of the mid-1980s, and you can see there's this sort of slow, steady decline in glacier area up until around the early 2010s, at which point it really just starts to drop off a cliff. And this is similar to some of the rates of glacier loss that we're seeing in the North Cascades, on Mount Rainier as well. And this could have a lot of potential impacts on water resources, so our drinking water, hydroelectric power, as well as impacts on wildlife.
So I'm looking at snow depth and water equivalent. Snow depth is basically the closest thing we can use to know snowfall. Water equivalent is just the amount of water content that's within snow. And I don't want to depress you, but it's a similar trend that we're seeing with snow. I'm pretty early on in the analysis, but both variables are decreasing, and that's really going to be the case for the Salish Sea. What's the implication of this? Less snow just means a change in water availability. We're seeing a change in the water cycle that we've historically been familiar to in the Salish Sea area. This can have serious potential long-term impacts on riparian and forest ecosystems. Generally, we're going to see less spring runoff because there is less snow to be melted in the first place. That snow is melting earlier. Coming from that, we can see more drought stress, less water availability. This can have an indirect effect. We can maybe see increased fire frequency because there's less water. We might see changing vegetation communities because of that as well. So there's a lot of indirect impacts that are coming from this. Now, climate is kind of half the equation here. We also want to analyze how climate is having an impact on land cover change. That's a lot of what I will be doing for my thesis. I'm looking at Garry Oak habitat change in the Salish Sea bioregion. A past graduate that we had, Kaylee, did grassland change in the San Juan Islands. The process we're using is something called digitization or georeferencing. What this process entails, we're taking satellite imagery, historic aerial photography, and other historical records, and we're basically making a digital copy of these maps. And in doing that, we can get an idea for how land type is changing over time. Part of her project, she found that 78% of San Juan Island grasslands have been lost. We don't know what the statistic is for Gary oak loss on San Juan Islands and Salish Sea. We know we've lost about 95% of Gary oaks, Vancouver Island. Similar trend is true for Willamette Valley, Oregon, Gary oaks. We should know that for San Juans as well as other stands that are in the central Salish Sea bioregion.
All right, thank you, Emily Taylor. So I know it can seem like this depressing thing sometimes talking about climate change stuff, but the more we know about what's happening locally, the more we can make informed adaptation decisions to reduce the negative effects. So I think knowing more is definitely going to give us a more positive future. And I'm proud to be part of this research, looking at our local impacts that are going to impact us and the plants and animals we know. Okay, now something that's not about the future. We're going to start talking about the past. I want to introduce this Upper Skagit Valley project that we've been working on. Ross Lake, that you might know, beautiful, nice camping spot, right, is in the Upper Skagit River area. The Skagit River runs from, if you can see, far upper part there, starts in Canada, flows through Ross Lake, passes through a number of dams along the way, and enters the Salish Sea. It is, in fact, the second most important river in the Salish Sea region in terms of how much water comes out of it. It's very small compared to the Fraser, which dominates all the other rivers, but it's still quite important as the second most significant river. That means it's ecologically very important, both on land and in the ocean, in the sea. It's also economically important because of hydropower, agriculture, and so on. Now, fascinatingly, this is a transboundary system, an international river that has to be managed, at least to a certain degree, collaboratively between two different countries. So we are looking into the environmental history of this transboundary Upper Skagit Valley to understand more the long-term human land use patterns that have affected the health and resilience of this system. So I'm going to hand it over to Isaac and Evan to give a little bit more detail about exactly what we're looking at and who asked us to look at it.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Isaac. I also work for the Spatial Institute, shockingly enough. And yeah, our project, we're making a historical mining atlas for the Upper Skagit Valley. And we're funded by the Skagit Environmental Endowment Commission, which is a Canadian, United States teamwork initiative working on conservation in the Upper Skagit Valley there. And so they do a lot of conservation work. They fund like environmental education efforts around there. And yeah, they wanted us to really collect a bunch of data on mining in the Upper Skagit Valley and share that story in a way that's accessible and compelling and gives us more insight into how mining has in the past and may in the future impact the environment around there.
Hello, and I am Evan. What this project has really looked like for us is, much like other people, we are scrounging all over the internet, through physical archives, old maps, all sorts of things to try and find as much data as we possibly can on any mining that has historically taken place anywhere within the Upper Skagit River's watershed. And we are specifically looking at the area that's around Ross Lake and then going up into British Columbia. With a real focus on trying to have a data set that is transboundary. Before this, there were a lot of different data sets that were specifically mining in Whatcom County, where we find ourselves here, or mining in British Columbia, but not a lot that we could find that transcended that border. So yeah, for us, we have been kind of, as I mentioned, pouring through so many different old maps. We have visited multiple different archive locations, looked at lots of old PDFs on the internet, and created some massive spreadsheets of as many mines as we could possibly find, as many different prospects and occurrences, all sorts of different mining terminology, and really trying to compile that into something that we can then make a spatial data set from, make points and polygons for where all this old mining activity has happened. And then now we are finally getting to the point where we can make the stuff people actually care about, some maps, some interactive websites that should be hopefully pretty interesting.
Thanks. Yeah, so this is one of the maps we're working on. It's work in progress, but it's kind of trying to capture the style of a lot of the old mining district maps we've been looking at from the 18 and 1900s. It's probably pretty hard to read up there, but it's been fun getting to dive into the cartography aspect a little bit more. Yeah.
Beautiful. Oh, would you actually want to talk about this?
Sure. So this is kind of a zoomed in area map of the Ruby Creek area, which is one of the areas in the Upper Skagit Valley that saw the most mining. There's a pretty big sort of gold rush here where everyone thought, man, there's a ton of gold for us here. This is great. And they got out there, did some mining. Turned out there wasn't actually like that much gold out there, sadly for them. So there's was some mining there, and now a lot of abandoned mining equipment remains up there still that you can go trudge through the underbrush and find if you want to.
And then I focused slightly more on the British Columbia side of things for a lot of this project. So we can see we are just north of Ross Lake, just north of the border. And one of the most interesting things in this project to read about, pouring through these old mining commissioners' notes, was this thing called the Steamboat Mountain Fiasco, which I made this map of, sort of looking at the Steamboat Mountain area, which is now known as Shawata Mountain. And it's, again, pretty hard to read, but right in the middle of the frame there is Steamboat Mountain, where in 1910, these two prospectors from Nevada convinced hundreds of people from British Columbia and Whatcom County, when Bellingham was still called New Whatcom at the time, hundreds of people that they had just found a bunch of gold on this mountain. So yeah, all these people moved out, moved their families, and started two different town sites, which are right next to the Skagit River that you can see. And within 1 year, they had built these two little lively towns, had claimed the entire area, and people started mining. And it turned out there was no gold at all. And people discovered this within the year. Actual geologic people surveyed it and discovered, yes, this was entirely a scam. And the two people that had started this company that sold thousands of shares to people all across the region, they had fled to South America and California by this time, and it caused a depression in the whole area for like a decade. Fun times.
All right, one of the biggest outputs that we're hoping for from this map is a story map that we're actively working on. This is some screenshots from that. And for those of you who might not be familiar, a story map is just a kind of interactive multimedia website that you can scroll through. It can include maps and pictures and all kinds of fun stuff. But this is just going to be a really nice, accessible way to share that story of the history of mining. We'll talk about conservation in here. We'll talk about potential future conservation efforts. And yeah, it should be a really, really fun project to finish up.
If the screen didn't show how beautiful those maps were, you should just find some way to look at them later online because they really are beautiful. Okay, last but not least, certainly, is a new project that's just getting underway. So this is very preliminary stuff. We're going to leave you with a cliffhanger. Looking at wildlife corridors in Whatcom County and especially in Bellingham. I found this lovely photo here of these deer politely crossing at a crosswalk. But we know that often wildlife do not cross at crosswalks and obey the stoplights and things. So you may have seen these wildlife corridor signs around. How do they get placed and who's putting them there? How do we know where wildlife crossings are? So we're diving in, trying to use GIS and some statistical analysis to help Bellingham reduce wildlife vehicle collisions. This is a project that Kyle and Abby are both working on. Kyle couldn't be here because he's working, so I'm going to hand it over to Abby to give us an overview of their preliminary work on this.
Thank you. Hi, so like Aquila said, I'm Abby. Kyle could not be here today, but he did put together these beautiful slides for us, so shout out to him. So we're working, me and Kyle, with Dr. Susan Kane Ronning in the Washington Sierra Club Wildlife Committee on this project. And she's been working on it for a couple years, and then Kyle and I are kind of helping her catch up on like her data input and then start doing some actual GIS analysis on that data. So as many of you probably already know, vehicle collisions are a primary cause of mortality for a lot of our local wildlife here, like deers, raccoons, even beavers, and many more of our local critters. And this is obviously harmful to wildlife, but it's also very expensive, can cost an individual motorist up to like $10,000, and is also, of course, dangerous to drivers. So there's a lot of reasons why this is an important issue. And our goal is to just visualize like wildlife collisions in Bellingham and the surrounding Whatcom County to kind of help inform decision making going forward to help reduce that those rates of animal collisions. So our methods right now are in the kind of the phase of the project where we're focusing on digitizing data from animal control. So what we get is what you see on the bottom left here is case reports. They're not formatted in a way that you can input them into ArcGIS Pro, which is what we're using for GIS or any GIS platform at all. So we have to manually reorganize them, which is a lot of copying and pasting. So that's kind of the phase that we're in right now. It's very fun. But what we do is we get it into a better format for ArcGIS, and then we go ahead and geocode it, which is just taking the addresses that are listed for each incident and then turning them into a latitude and longitude, which we can then turn into a point on a map. So this is a lot more interesting and informative to look at than a spreadsheet that you have to read that's like 200 pages long. Yeah, so once we've got that digitization done, we're hoping to really dive into the analysis. So Kyle threw these together for us. We haven't gotten very far into the analysis part yet, but we wanted an example of kind of what that would look like. So he threw together some of Susan's data that she had already assembled for 2016 through 2021. Did a little hotspot analysis. As you can see, we already see some patterns in where black-tailed deer specifically are being picked up. So its carcass recovery sites are kind of, you're seeing some patterns of like them being near Lake Whatcom, I'm noticing a lot of. And then we also have just a simple map of the number of deceased carcasses per neighborhood as well. So we're already seeing some patterns there. And then I'm hoping that once we get the 2022 to 2024 data in, we'll start seeing some even more patterns there too. So as I mentioned, more detailed hotspot analysis is one of our next steps. And then we also are hoping to just do some more static maps of like different local areas like neighborhoods or the like urban growth area around Bellingham to kind of show like maybe there's certain intersections where we're seeing more deer be hit by cars, or there's a family of raccoons that keeps getting hit on a certain road. You know, there's lots of patterns that we might find that we can find at a smaller scale. And then the eventual goal is to hopefully do some wildlife corridor analysis. So if you don't know what a wildlife corridor is, it's just like where animals are traveling between different habitat areas. And so that's where we see a lot of collisions, is where like animals are passing between different habitat areas. And if we can kind of see some patterns in where we're seeing more collisions, we can kind of learn where developing actual habitat corridors would be beneficial too. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at. Really? Thank you.
Okay, I know we're just about time. This is exciting though, because it's going to be used to help neighborhood associations figure out where to put those signs and hopefully, you know, save some lives and traumatic experiences for people too. So very quickly with my last slide, just want to say we also have graduate research going on with the Spatial Institute that's not funded through external contracts necessarily. The theses that Emily and Taylor are working on, and also Gary, who was over there, and Anthony, all looking at different environmental topics using GIS. Little plug for our GIS degrees. If this stuff sounds exciting to you, we have a BA in Environmental Studies with an emphasis in GIS. We have a minor in GIS, and we have both an undergraduate and a graduate GIS certificate. And the classes that you use towards those certificates can also be double counted toward either a minor or a major. People often ask me, which one should you do? If you really love GIS, do the BA with an emphasis in GIS and the certificate. That's the short answer. I won't talk through all this, but just know we've got a lot of classes all the time. You can kind of jump in with the intro class, ENVS 320, or maybe start with 201, that environmental data and information class that does involve some GIS work. And you can follow through our very logically named series of courses, GIS 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? So there are options around the year. The idea is that you can complete our main sequence in basically 4 quarters. And they're all pretty sequential. So with that, I want to say thank you to all of you for being here and to our amazing crew who today inspired me to rename the institute the Scrounging Institute instead of the Spatial Institute, because we do a lot of data hunting. It is such joy to get to work with such a talented crew. Amazing. So thank you, everyone.
Okay, so we've just got a couple minutes for questions here, so I will limit it to 1 question for Kaitlin and 1 for the GIS folks. So any questions for Kaitlin first? Okay, I saw Carrie's hand first. No. Okay, Jordan.
Yes.
Okay, when did our green crabs first appear in the area?
In the area, so for Padilla Bay, it was 2016, where my site is. But for Washington State, it was 1998 in like Willapa Bay area.
All right, question for our GIS squad. Carrie, go for it. So any other implications that we could derive from the wildlife corridor analyses? Thanks.
Definitely, yeah. Our time was a little limited to get into that, but that's kind of the ultimate goal of the project. So you saw some examples of like the wildlife signs that we'd love to implement in areas where there's more deer collisions especially, and then stuff like speed limit reductions or like fencing can be really helpful. It'd be in an ideal world, wildlife crossings and stuff as well, but those are a little bit more infrastructure expensive. So yeah.
All right, thank you all. I encourage you to come down and chat one-on-one if you'd like. Otherwise, we'll see you next week. Thanks, folks.